Dysfunction induced by mental stress predicts major adverse cardiovascular events in patients with coronary artery disease.
Good afternoon, and thanks for having me. And I don't have no disclosure, as well as my team at Henry. And acute psychological stress has been associated with adverse cardiovascular disease events, including myocardial ischemia and infarction, arrhythmias, and heart failure, including stress cardiomyopathy. And among the possible mechanisms explaining this association, the major one states that repeated exposure to psychological stress leads to activation of the adrenal and the sympathetic system. And through several different mechanisms, it leads to decreased nitric oxide and eventually to endothelial dysfunction, which over time can lead to adverse events. This concept has been explored in vivo by this technique that is called flow-mediated vasodilation that essentially measures nitric oxide bioavailability in vivo. And in this study from circulation in 2000, healthy subjects underwent mental stress, and that provoked 2.5 decrease in FMD, and that lasted for about 4 hours. FMD is a really important measurement, and it has been shown in a prior meta-analysis that for each 1% point higher FMD, there is a 10% decrease in adverse events. However, there are several gaps in the literature since those prognostic studies only evaluated baseline FMD. In baseline FMD, when fully adjusted for risk factors, at least in some studies, make FMD loses its prognostic ability. And lastly, the transient endothelial dysfunction phenomenon induced by mental stress has an unknown prognostic significance yet. So here, we aim to evaluate whether a transient decrease in endothelial function provoked by mental stress predicts major adverse events in patients with stable CAD. So our hypothesis is that stress-induced endothelial dysfunction is associated with poor cardiovascular disease outcomes. In order to achieve this, we enrolled 577 patients, 74% men, during a median follow-up of 3 years. And during that time period, we had 74 adverse events, including 13 cardiovascular deaths, 15 MIs, 34 unstable anginas with revascularization, and 12 acute decompensated heart failures. And all of the patients underwent a mental stress protocol using a standardized public speaking test with an emotional component in it. And after a period of 30 minutes in a quiet room, they had 2 minutes to prepare a speech and 3 minutes to deliver it to an audience wearing white coats, giving negative feedback. And the FMD test was done before and 30 minutes after mental stress. Regarding the FMD or flow-mediated vasodilation protocol, it was done as follows. So at first, we measured up the brachial artery diameter at baseline with an ultrasound. Afterwards, a pneumatic cuff was placed on the wrist and inflated to supradiastolic pressure for 5 minutes. Afterwards, the cuff was released to achieve reactive hyperemia, and the brachial artery diameter was measured again. To calculate FMD, we got the difference between the peak minus the baseline diameter of the brachial artery and divided it by the baseline diameter times 100% to give us a percentage. And this was done at rest and post-mental stress, so we could calculate the delta FMD. For our survival analysis, we use a Cox proportional hazards model, adjusting for demographics, cardiovascular risk factors like hypertension, diabetes, smoking, vascular factors like vagal artery diameter, and shear stress. Overall, there was a 23% decrement in FMD after mental stress. And when we break down patients by transient endothelial dysfunction status, meaning patients that had a decrease in FMD with stress versus those who didn't, we found that 64% of patients in our sample had that transient endothelial dysfunction phenomenon, while 36% of patients didn't. When we take a look at the social demographics characteristics of the study population, broken down by endothelial dysfunction status, we didn't find any significant differences. And also, we didn't find any significant differences when we take a look at the clinical characteristics of the study population. So this is our main result. We found that transient endothelial dysfunction with mental stress predicts worse cardiovascular disease outcomes. Since the presence of stress-induced transient endothelial dysfunction was associated with a 87% increased risk for major adverse cardiovascular events. When we take a look at baseline or rest flow-mediated vasodilation, we found a weaker relationship since it was not significantly associated with outcomes. And when we take a look at delta FMD as a continuous measurement, we found that for each 1% point decrement in delta FMD, there was a 17% increased risk in the composite outcomes. We also found a 38% increased risk in cardiovascular death and 16% increased risk in unstable angina with revascularization. Again, for rest FMD, we found a weaker relationship between those outcomes. And the composite outcomes was not statistically significantly associated with the decrement in rest FMD. When we take a look at the incremental effect of vascular parameters on the prediction of cardiovascular events, when we add rest FMD to a model including traditional risk factors like hypertension, C-reactive protein, there is no significant increase in C statistics, either category 3 NOI or natural classification index. But when we add delta FMD to this model, we have a 5% increase in the area under the curve for C statistics, and also 26% of the patients are reclassified to a higher, they are classified from less to like a higher risk category. The study had several strengths since it was a large, well-characterized sample of CT patients undergoing an experimental manipulation, and the events that were independently adjudicated by experienced cardiologists. We also had some limitations given the modest incidence of major adverse events. Also, there was a smaller number of women relatively to men. And finally, those results cannot be generalized for patients without coronary artery disease. And in conclusion, we found that transient endothelial dysfunction with mental stress is associated with adverse events in patients with CAD. And those endothelial responses to stress, they might represent the possible mechanistic link between psychological stress and the worst prognosis we see in these patients, especially the patients with coronary artery disease. And I would like to thank you all, and also all of the collaborators, including my mentors, Dr. Kayumi is down there, Dr. Shah, Dr. Mehta, Dr. Vaccarino, and thank you all.
Thank you very much. Questions from the judges? Great presentation, very interesting work. Do you find a correlation between the change in heart rate and the presence of transient dysfunction? And was the change in heart rate alone a predictor of outcome?
Okay, so yeah, it's a great question. So the first question, as I understand it correctly, you're asking between the heart rate change and a change in transient endothelial dysfunction. So although it's not presented here, we have several hemodynamic parameters we use, including systolic blood pressure, heart rate, and then the rate pressure product. And also we took a look at epinephrine as well. So with mental stress, there is a significant increase in heart rate and systolic blood pressure, and even epinephrine, as you might expect. However, there is no relationship between those parameters, those hemodynamic parameters, and FMD. And the second question, I couldn't hear correctly. Could you?
Whether the change in heart rate with mental stress was a predictor of outcome?
Oh, the change in heart rate with mental stress. No, that was not predictive of outcomes in our sample.
Resting heart rate was also not predictive. Resting heart rate.
Oh, resting heart rate. Well, I didn't find an association between that, and at least when we put in the multivariate model, we didn't find this association. There is a trend there. There is a proclivity between patients with increased heart rate and worse outcomes, but this is not statistically significant.
I asked because the resting heart rate can be a bit of a measure of your vagal tone. And the increase in heart rate with mental stress is usually a combination of both vagal components and vagal equilibrium. So in addition to adding, which measures simply sympathetic output, that means a measure of your vagal defense and vagal activation.
I didn't realize how complex that would be like a single measurement, but this is